All right, I had an intro written, and then I was running a map to test something, and this map, Evil Bank, dropped, and outro is thrown away. Evil Bank? Isn't that just a regular bank? All right, hi, it's Larold, and I'm going to talk about what I've done in the past week with my Mjolner Hierophant, but first, we just broke 8,000 subscribers, and we're really happy about it. So thank you to everyone who subscribed and supported us along the way. Annihilate the like and subscribe button if you haven't already, and you know, if you want to see more content like this from us. Okay, first off, just to address it, I already talked about it in the first video about this build, but the build concept is not my own, not my original idea. Nothing's an original idea, but this is Connor Converse's idea. I'm not sure when he came up with it. Honestly, I try not to watch other people's videos. I don't want to accidentally copy something. I want to intentionally copy something like I did here with the name One Pepsi Left. Very clearly tried to pay tribute to him, but I think maybe some people didn't realize that or something. The man's got shooters. So I'd been aware of the build for a long time, vaguely, and it seemed like a totally different archetype from anything I normally play. So I wanted to give it a go and ironically see if I could make this int stacking build as dumb and easy as possible. My ideal build is really just like a Cyclone Slayer, and I did make a Starforged Cyclone Slayer last league that I really enjoyed, but the problem with that is that it's just so flimsy, you just get one shot all the time, and that drives me insane. So in the past, previous leagues, I've just played Cast on Crit Forbidden Right Occultist. That usually fixes the problem of getting instantly killed by everything, and also gives you somewhere in the range of 30 to 50 million DPS to play with, so pretty much satisfies everything you want and that I'm getting out of this Mjolner Hierophant build. The problem is that it's much harder to build in this league due to the mana flask suffix nerf that really fixed all the mana problems for that build. And this seemed like the best alternative, and it has really exceeded all of my expectations. I do think it's a better build than Cast on Crit Forbidden Right ever was. All the smoothness and self-sustain that you want out of Cyclone Slayer, but with the strength and reach of caster scaling, and again, not getting one shot all the time. Alright, now in terms of what I've been doing, I've been farming tier 17s and killing Uber bosses, basically the same stuff as I'd been doing the last update on this build, except I've been farming through the tier 17s quite a lot faster and safer and smoother, and I've been killing the Uber bosses even faster than before. And I mean, really, I've just been blowing through the tier 17 super fast. Some of them I've been clearing in under 5 minutes. Pretty happy with that. I did try some Delve. Someone recommended it as a way to intentionally waste my time, and mission accomplished. Oh boy, I hadn't touched Delve in years, and I've never gone more than depth 500, which is not deep at all. I actually found it more fun than I expected, but it seems like it's going to take, days and days to even begin being profitable, and that was kind of a turnoff compared to tier 16s and tier 17s being profitable right now. So after the last video, we got a really helpful comment from someone who, to put it mildly, knows a lot more about this build than I do and has a lot more experience playing it than me, and they gave several suggestions that I was very appreciative of. So I thought I would spend some time trying them out just to kind of see how different the build feels, and I have to say it is quite a lot better. I feel much tankier than I did before. I did sacrifice a bit of damage, but my damage really feels, I don't know, the same, maybe better, and I haven't really felt any loss in tankiness due to dropping chaos resistance. So this is the setup I'm going with now. I have dropped my chaos flask, the amethyst flask, in favor of a jade flask. I've also dropped wrath in favor of grace. Now, this was a pretty substantial drop in damage on the PoE. If we pull that up here, I have my grace set up here. And as you can see, I've gone from a very low amount of evade chance before, 5% or something, to with grace and the jade flask and a defiance banner coming back into the mix, I am quite a bit higher, pretty close to the evasion cap. If you run a Watcher's Eye and a Grace Watcher's Eye, you can actually get up to the evasion cap. If we Watcher's Eye here, if we get ourselves a nice Grace Watcher's Eye right here, additional chance to evade, with the amount of evasion that I have from gear and stats and so on, it would take about 7% on a Watcher's Eye to get up to that 95% cap, which is pretty crazy. Now, I did obviously, as I said, give up that chaos res. I'm still above 0% chaos res, but notably not at chaos res cap. I haven't really noticed a difference. The amount of effective health that you have, just the level of huge energy shield pool, huge mana pool, and then having coruscating elixir to protect your energy or protect your health pool with energy shield most of the time, and then if it is down for some reason, having that ivory tower where your mana is protecting your life pool from chaos damage as well. Both of those have really just combined to make it so that I really never have noticed any sort of issues with chaos damage or anything like that. Ultimately, I feel like this has been a better defensive setup to have all of this evasion at the cost of that chaos max hit, because ultimately you really don't get hit with huge chaos hits or huge fizz hits all that often. Really, the huge hits that happen in this game are almost always elemental damage, and our elemental max hit is pretty big with Arcane Cloak up and, you know, all of our other defensive stuff. And, you know, we have pretty high uptime on Arcane Cloak. You know, with it down, it's not as high, but with it up, it's pretty high. We're pretty tanky. I have definitely felt pretty fine when it comes to tankiness. So if I compare the damage that I was getting before with Wrath, you know, we gain, if we're looking at about half of the bolts hitting, we're gaining like 5 million DPS by having Wrath up. If we're max damage, all bolts hitting, we're looking at about 10 million DPS, which is not nothing. It's not nothing at all, but I do think that the about 14-15% evade chance that we get out of Grace is actually worth that trade. It is something you could hypothetically swap back and forth, depending on your gem sockets, like depending on if you have like a white socket somewhere, maybe in your boot setup or something. It's something you could swap back and forth potentially to like Uber bosses and stuff, but really I've found that just rocking with Grace has been totally fine, and I've been totally doing enough damage to totally clobber bosses. Additionally, really helpful piece of advice here that I got was dropping this whole Ash, Frost, and Storm wheel and just coming up and taking the Static Blows wheel with Lightning Mastery. That gives you increases and reductions to maximum mana apply to shock value at 30% of their value. Now, I'd played around with this before. I played around with this before I even put out the first video, because this immediately came to mind as something that was like worth looking into. And I don't know what I did wrong, but I was doing something wrong clearly, because I wasn't getting just like gargantuan like 70+% shocks, but I am now. Consistently, I am getting 69 to 71% shocks on Uber bosses, on tier 17 bosses, and I am just rocking with the Shock Nova chest setup that I had talked about. You know, I talked about really like 3 main setups, one with Lightning Warp, one with Shock Nova, and one with Lightning Conduit of the Heavens, all being in your Awakened Cast while channeling chest 6 link. You know, you're always rocking the same setup in your weapon and shield, ball lightning, and then all the appropriate support gems. That's the best way to go, but you kind of had a bit of flexibility depending on whether you're trying to zoom through tier 16s, in which case I think the Lightning Warp setup is the best, or if you wanted to kind of smoothly clear through tier 17s or take down like bosses, in which case I thought the Shock Nova and Overcharge support setup is the best. That is ultimately what I'm running for everything, including tier 16s. It's just so smooth and quick that I don't really feel like I've noticed the difference in increased speed between having Lightning Warp versus Shock Nova. And I just really prefer this setup. You know, it looks nice, as we can see here. Just very nice, like very satisfying looking. And I feel like I get enough speed moving along just frost blinking to make it all work. Also, with the increased value of shocks and overcharge kind of combining together, you're pretty consistently able to hit max shocks, which your max shocks are not going to be 50% because of Shock Nova having quality to it. You actually want to go for a 23 quality on your Shock Nova if you can. That is actually more valuable, I think, than the level 21. I had a 2120. Comparing that in the 2123, you know, it's hard to tell the difference between 1% more shock versus a little bit more damage, but it does feel like having that extra bit going all the way up to 71 effect on your shocks instead of 70% seems like it does more for your ball lightning to get just a little bit more juice. And I have included that in the config here. So, you know, this is one other thing that you want to make sure when you're like running maps. You want to make sure that you're not running maps that make it so you can't, that enemies avoid elemental ailments, because obviously that'll cut your damage, not in half, but it'll cut your damage by about 71%, which is quite substantial. But that has really fixed like any sort of damage concerns I had. You know, I'm still rocking around 40 million DPS, which is enough to shred Uber bosses, enough to shred all the tier 17 bosses, enough to even shred tier 17 rares, which can often be just as dangerous as the bosses, especially when you're in some maps that have like 6 or 7 extra mods on all the rares. Even those guys are just kind of getting blasted in half. Feels pretty great. Now, another thing that we're doing here is we are using one tattoo of the Tessalio Warrior to give ourselves some blind chance. A 5% chance to blind enemies on hit with attacks doesn't sound like a lot, but blind kind of does a lot of heavy lifting here. It's really, really valuable to have that ability to blind enemies. And, you know, we are losing a dexterity node. We're having to compensate, obviously, for putting Grace into the build. Grace has a pretty high dex requirement. And so the way that I've fixed that is I've done a couple of things. One, I've taken this Energy Shield Mastery that gives you 50% of Energy Shield added to your stun threshold. I've removed that, and I've just gone for stun immunity through a Flask suffix. I've had to lose some move speed in order to do that. Honestly, I'm fine with it. I'm still using a Quicksilver Flask. I'm still fast enough as far as I'm concerned. You know, again, clearing some tier 17 maps, some pretty tough ones in under 5 minutes. I think that's fast enough for anybody. So in losing that mastery, I'm able to pick up just good old agility. You know, it could be agility, it could be alacrity, whatever. Just 30 dex from the tree. That is fixing things. You know, you could get it from gear, but that really requires making some sacrifices elsewhere in your gear to pick up that extra about 28 to 30 dexterity in order to fit this in. And you really do want that blind chance, because blind, as it says there, gives 20% less accuracy and evasion, and it lasts for 4 seconds. So because we're using Cyclone, we're hitting 4 times a second, or actually a little faster. You know, the baseline is like 4 a second, but we're hitting a little bit faster than that. If we look at our Cyclone attack speed here in the PoB, it is, what is this? 0.231 seconds per attack. So technically 4.31 times per second. 4.31 times 0.05 means we're blinding like, what is this? About 21% chance to blind every second, and blind lasts for 4 seconds. So that means we're getting like 85% uptime on blind. Now, because of that, we actually don't really have to do a lot more to be accuracy capped on enemies. So we don't have to run precision. We don't have to run like accuracy in our rings or anything like that. We don't have to do anything crazy to make sure that we're hitting. You know, if we look here, without the enemy blinded, 97% hit chance, pretty good already. But then with them blinded, 100%. Also has a pretty huge impact on our evasion. No, I mean, not that big. It's a couple percent, but not for nothing, right? A couple percent more chance to evade attacks. That's a couple percent less damage that we're taking throughout the course of mapping, increasing our damage by a fair amount as well by having those blinds. So it's really just doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's increasing our damage, it's increasing our defenses, it's doing a lot for us. Now, I'm also using Dread Banner again, and we are using Dread Banner, not Defiance. I'll just show off kind of the difference between those two. Dread Banner makes it so that you impale, which increases your fizz damage, which is basically nothing. That's completely irrelevant. The only real value of the Dread Banner is the less accuracy on nearby enemies, but as you can see, we're at 88% evade. If I turn that off, 84, so we're getting about 4% evasion chance. That's pretty good. Now, by comparison, Defiance Banner will give you armor and evasion rating and reduce crit chance for nearby enemies. So, you know, you're making full use of the evasion rating and the reduced crit chance. The only difference here is 85% evade chance instead of 88. So quite a bit less effect out of Defiance Banner in terms of like making yourself more tanky, making yourself more evasive, I should really say. With that being said, I think either of these can be fine, Dread Banner or Defiance Banner. There's kind of benefits to both. You know, more actual evade chance out of Dread Banner. I think that makes it better generally, but Defiance Banner does make you a little bit more resilient against crits. So if you're not rocking like reduced extra damage from crits on your gear, like on corruptions, then Defiance Banner could be a good alternative as well. Both pretty good. Good reason to use either of them, but you know, I am using Dread Banner at the moment just because a little bit more evasive. Now, some people, I have looked into other people playing this setup. Instead of coming all the way over here and taking this cluster here, or this node here, I have seen some people come all the way around to the right and pick up some like jewel sockets over here, and even this, set up this cluster jewel here instead of potentially this one, or in addition to it, doing 3 cluster jewels to really flex on the adorned, and then also picking up Ghost Dance. That is something that kind of appealed to me. It seemed pretty interesting. The only real problem I had with it was you can't do all of the, maybe it shows up a little better in game here, but you can't do all the fun little like orange spaghetti weaving back and forth through the tree that I'm doing. You just don't have the points for that. And so even though it seems like it's further away to come all the way down from the start and up and around and down to the right and so on, over here, the distance, if I were to put a cluster in right here and do just a like a normal come around to this side, the distance is something like 40 something, 45 or 44 allocated passive skills between the socket all the way over here on the right in the starting location, as opposed to about 59 here. So I did play around with it in PoB for a while, trying to make it work, and I just found that I had a lot less mana coming from the split personality jewels. Now, you know, if you wanted to just do a full adorned setup and not worry about split personality, then I guess that would work, but I feel like you're losing a lot of value by not maximizing those split personalities. It's a stat stacker build. You kind of want to get everything you can out of those split personalities. So in terms of playing around with flasks, one little thing that I have had to kind of make as an adjustment here, because I previously had like amethyst flask that had attack speed and reduced curse effect, you know, kind of could swap those in and out. I've basically just done the same thing with my sapphire flasks. I have, for standard content, I have one that just has the increased attack speed to get my attack speed up from like 4 attacks per second to like right in the range of the cooldown on the Mjolner effect. So, you know, we're getting right in that like 0.25 second cooldown range, which is slightly reduced thanks to the boots. And 10% is right around the amount that I need for that. So for maps like tier 17 maps that have all of the curses on them, I'm willing to just kind of bite the bullet, drop the attack speed from the flask and just have reduced curse effect. That works. You know, you do lose some damage. Like if I were to just pop into PoB here and just take this flask off, I lose in like the kind of maximum damage, I'm losing something like, what is this, like 6 million DPS? Yeah, it's about 6 million DPS to take this flask off. You know, it's not ideal, but if we're talking about dealing with the annoying triple curse tier 17 maps or not, I'm okay with sacrificing like 5-6 million DPS to nullify those curses. But generally speaking, I am rolling around with the attack speed flask, and then, you know, stun immunity, stun avoidance on a flask, and then still rocking with Storm Shroud. I did think about dropping Storm Shroud and the chance to avoid being shocked and just getting like crafting as a prefix freeze immunity, and just trying to kind of deal with affixes or status effects happening. But ultimately I decided I just would rather stick with the Storm Shroud as it is. Pretty happy with that. And then obviously that final flask there giving the elemental resistance is still just super valuable. Another thing I changed up was the Anoint on the amulet. So again, this was part of that recommendation of things to play around with. You know, Primal Spirit is kind of like the optimal, ideal Anoint for your neck in a lot of situations. You know, it's the PoB warrior approach, right? More max mana, more strength, more int. All of it makes sense. The only real problem is that it isn't doing anything to help with your mana sustain. And so by taking Essence Sap, you're getting, you know, a little bit more max, you're getting attack damage leeches mana. You know, you do get that out of mana leech support quite a bit more, but you also get increased max total mana recovery from leech and increased total recovery per second from mana leech. So you're getting a lot more mana back per second. And I really have noticed a difference that even though this running Essence Sap is like worse in PoB, definitely a lot worse in PoB than Primal Spirit, you know, we're talking like 5% less damage or so. In practice, I found that I have significantly more mana all of the time, and that really synergizes nicely with the Leech Mastery, the Energy Shield Leech, you know, Light Eater, and then the 10% of Leech is instant, has really all come together to make it so that I feel like I'm never starved on mana in any situation, even a pure single target boss fight. I'm fully sustaining on mana. I'm doing max damage all the time instead of sort of kind of riding the wave up and down as mana goes up and down and up and down. Basically always able to full sustain and just really blast everything in half. I really found this to be a lot better this combination of Essence Sap with the current setup that I'm rocking with, and then like Light Eater and Static Blows and the masteries for each of those really all came together to make this build a lot stronger. And then I also felt that I did not need Zealot's Oath. I did try playing around with Zealot's Oath with this setup and with the life regen flask suffix. I think I have one of those around here we go. Crafted life regen during effect along with Zealot's Oath felt totally unnecessary because of all the sustain that we get out of Light Eater, out of our Leech Mastery. You know, if we look at it in the PoB, ideal situation, we're getting like 10,000 life per second, or ES leech per second, which is pretty huge. You know, I am running a Watcher's Eye that has energy shield per enemy hit while affected by discipline, and then also 10% of max mana as ES while affected by clarity. That second part is much more important and also much cheaper. Mana converting into ES while you're affected by clarity is critical, and that's really the only thing that is critical in your Watcher's Eye. The ES restored when you hit enemies while affected by discipline is okay. It helps with, like, I don't know, some very annoying map mod effects it can help with, but I haven't found it to be necessarily mandatory. I think I could get away with running like a Grace Watcher's Eye instead and getting that extra 7% evade chance. I think that would do me just as well too. All right, normally this is the part where I would talk about gear upgrades, but I didn't really make many other than the flasks. I'm pretty happy with where gear is at this point. I think there's always room for improvement, but we're looking pretty good as is. You know, I'm blasting tier 17s. I'm killing Uber bosses pretty easy. You know, obviously you die sometimes in tier 17s, that happens, but that's really just more of a problem with tier 17s not being the best design than anything with the class. So I think we're in pretty good shape here. All right, now I want to finish up with kind of a rapid fire FAQ because I've seen a lot of the same questions asked, and I think this is a good way to just address them all in one place. Okay, most asked question, what net can I use instead of this 200 Divine Wind? Great question, very easy answer. So Eyes of the Great Wolf with attributes and max mana earlier on, I guess before I started talking about this build, quite a lot cheaper. It has gone up in price. So what you can do is, instead of, you know, you don't have to worry about anoints or anything, you know, you can just get one that has increased attributes and something else on it. Like, I think I had some of those searches pulled up, but you can just look through other ones. You know, some of these are quite cheap. A lot of them aren't that great, but that's really not the end of the world. You know, you can make one work. I mean, frankly, mine isn't really that great either. It's a 13 increased attributes, 13% increased attributes instead of 16%. So you could look for one that's like 30 or 32% increased attributes and then has some other useful stat on it. And I do think that would go pretty far. Oh, here we go. I did have a search pulled up. So just looking at some of these, like, you know, there's some stuff in here that's junk. Quantity of items, you're not really like valuing quant all that much, but you would get more stuff, so that wouldn't be too bad. Increase max life, that honestly would not be too bad. That would give you more life to reserve away. You are trying to reserve life in these 100 life breakpoints thanks to Ivory Tower, so, you know, if that gets you over another 100 life breakpoint, that actually could give you more ES. That'll give you more defense, more damage, so that actually could be pretty useful. You know, something like attack and cast speed, you would have to then balance that out. That probably would mean that you'd be able to get away with not using an attack speed flask. I haven't sat and mathed it out all in PoB, but you could probably drop the attack speed flask entirely and then maybe try to just get like an uncorrupted Mjolner and enchant it with attack speed, something like that. Or maybe a corrupted Mjolnir with attack speed on it. You know, you'd have to play around with that a little bit, but getting like a Eyes of the Great Wolf with attributes and attack speed and cast speed could actually do you, you know, a lot of like good quality of life and really not be that different than having the max mana. Like, okay, let's just take this one that has quant and the increased attributes and slap it into my build here. I think I already did that a minute ago. Okay, so I lose like 6%, 7% damage. Honestly, not that bad. Not that bad at all. You know, this isn't even catalysted either, which is another thing you do want to be sure to do. The annoying thing about having a corrupted neck, Eyes of the Great Wolf, is that you do have to use corrupted oil, which those bad boys are pretty expensive. Where is that? Yeah, here. Tainted oil, those are pretty expensive, but, you know, it's just kind of a one-time thing. But then also tainted catalysts, these can be a bit of a gamble. You know, you're just going to want to basically hit them until you get a halfway decent attribute modifier roll on your tainted catalyst. It can be a bit of a like time consuming gamble trying to roll those and try and get that. You know, I'd love for that to have rolled up high enough attribute modifier roll on that Tainted Catalyst to be 28% increased attributes instead of 27. But it is what it is. Now, another thing you can do, you can obviously just use like a crafted rare neck. I think I would probably want one that's either a Shaper neck for increased attributes or a Crusader neck for increased intelligence. You know, this is a lot more complicated than just running a unique, like actually getting a Crusader neck or like a Warlord Crusader neck would be ideal, I think. Increased int and increased strength and then a int roll, but you know, a Shaper neck with increased attributes and int and strength on it would be great. Lot of work to do this kind of a neck though. So yeah, I think crafting yourself a rare neck could definitely work and be just as good and probably be orders of magnitude cheaper, but it is going to take like some game knowledge and some time and luck to craft. But you know, that is also an option. I really think the best approach is just to use like an Eyes of the Great Wolf that has increased attributes, like a really good roll on that. And then just some other roll, you know, whatever, increased crit chance. That's not super valuable, but you know, just something along those lines. I mean, this would work. Increased attributes and damage, that would work fine. All right, another question that's just been asked a lot. League starter, just those two words, league starter? And the thing is, not exactly, right? If we just look at the character, you know, we're using a Mjolner, that's a unique. We're using an Indigon, that's a unique from a in-game boss. We're using Ivory Tower, that's a unique. Shaper's Touch, also a unique from an in-game boss. Mage Blood, not required, but always nice if you have it. Squire, rare in-game unique. Calandra's Touch, again, not required. You could just run 2 regular rings, but nice if you got it. Eyes of the Great Wolf, again, rare unique. Like, a lot of uniques in this build. So League Starter, not exactly. But we have put out, you know, over the course of several videos of talking about this build and just talking about like leveling second characters. You know, you can start a Stormbrand Hierophant. That is what I did for leveling this character up. Now I leveled, you know, it was a second character, it was a twink, so I had it pretty twinked out, but Stormbrand Hierophant leveling, just kind of zooming through the campaign, really works super well. Hierophant really fixes a lot of the mana issues that are very irritating while you're doing the campaign, so I really enjoyed that. I had never played a Hierophant before. It was a real like breath of fresh air. It was a real like fun change of pace, and I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I would recommend Stormbrand Hierophant as a like a leveling build. I think that was pretty fun, and I think you could basically league start that or Stormbrand Inquisitor maybe more realistically, so you could actually kind of get into in-game a little bit, and then basically once these items appear on the market and you're able to buy them up piece by piece by piece, you could assemble them all and then put this build together that way. So I do think you could sort of league start this build, but it would be more like you would be getting into this on like day 3 or something after starting a Stormbrand, probably Inquisitor, but maybe Hierophant. And then Prism Guardian, that is like a decent alternative shield to Squire. Now Squire is super duper cheap now, but it's not at the start of leagues, and Prism Guardian gives you a lot of value. You know, it builds in the arrogance support for your main auras, Dread Banner, Clarity, Discipline, builds that in for those, and it gives them a bunch of reservation efficiency, gives you a bunch of free decks, which is very helpful, gives you a massive amount of free Ellie Res, 25 here and 12 here, so 37 free Ellie Res, just super, super good as a shield for getting going, but you know, not as good as a Squire for giving you a guaranteed 6 link on your main hand. So that is, I guess, how I would try to get this going on like a budget or a league start or whatever. Okay, next question. How do I sustain Coruscating Elixir, this thing right here, the Ruby Flask? I die instantly, or I will die instantly to chaos damage if it's not up. That's just not true. You have Ivory Tower as well, which gives you chaos damage taken from mana before life. And, you know, if you're able to sustain your mana, which I think having Essence Sap really helps a lot with that, you're really not at much risk at all of just being like one banged or just immediately chipped down by a bit of chaos damage when Coruscating Elixir isn't up. Now, Coruscating Elixir, it is, you know, it is nice to have. I don't love doing maps that have like reduced flask charges generated, even though I'm on a Mage Blood and these 4 are all going to be up permanently, because I don't want it to mess with Coruscating Elixir uptime. But that is part of why I'm using the use when you hit a rare or unique enemy. if not already active, enchant on this instead of just like use when charges hit full to kind of guarantee that like max uptime, that we're not wasting consumption. I mean, it lasts a long time. You can see 11.5 seconds, pretty long, pretty high uptime. So, you know, I think the uptime is like been pretty good. I haven't really noticed myself ever getting killed by chaos damage, really. I also do play around with, kind of jump into one of my future questions here, I do kind of play around with jumping between Soul of Shikari for any maps where there is like poison damage listed, you know, especially tier 17s where every hit from enemies will poison. You'll have like 700 poisons on you if you're not running Soul of Shikari. Having Soul of Shikari on there, capping yourself at 3 poisons, you know, thank you, Soul of Shakira. And then Soul of Aberath, unaffected by Burning Ground. Basically, anytime that Burning Ground pops up and poison isn't also on the map, then I'm probably going to run Aberath as well. If I were doing Blight, I would definitely run Aberath. I don't want to get killed by any of the fire monsters from Blight that have like 1 billion health and scale their Burning Ground based off their health pool. But yeah, otherwise, most of the time, Soul of Shakira, sometimes Soul of Aberath, just if I know there's going to be Burning Ground around. All right, another question here, tier 17 regex. I did pull this up, so I don't use a tier 17 regex. You know, I looked at it a little bit. I thought maybe it would simplify things, and I feel like there's just way too much going on in tier 17 map rolling for me to trust a regex. I eyeball them all, but I do have kind of a standard regex, and it's really just this. Reflect elemental damage, can't do that. Can't leech for monsters, can't do that. And less cooldown recovery rate, can't do that. Those are the 3 things that really brick the build. Now, there are a couple of other things that are super annoying, like less area of effect. I'll do that on tier 16s. I'm not too worried about it. But on tier 17s, especially if it's the 50% less area of effect and I'm doing like back to basics, you know, this is an AoE build. So if you have like 70% less area of effect, you're going to have the circle's not going to exist. You're not going to be able to do literally any damage. So I don't do those. Less accuracy ratings, very annoying. Just like missing sucks. So I like to not do those. And then chance to avoid ailments. That's also a pretty annoying one. You can do it. It just means you're going to lose out on shock. You're going to lose like 60-70% of your damage, which is frustrating. And then finally, I think maybe the most irritating ones are just like minus max all res, less recovery of life and energy shield, and can't regen life, mana, and ES. All doable, technically speaking. As long as you're able to leech, you're able to do the no regen and less recovery rate. But they are annoying. And minus max all res just means you're going to have a lot more chances of getting one shot. The same is true with reduced effective non-curse auras from skills. I have done some maps with no non-curse auras, and, you know, it worked. I was able to get them done, but it's very annoying. So I'd say really the 3 that I like mandatory can't do are reflect LE damage, can't leech, and less cooldown recovery rate. Those are the 3 that I'm not even willing to like. I'm not going in there. They're totally bricked. And then a lot of these other ones, you know, keep your eyes out for them. Less area of effect is particularly sneaky. I've had some maps where, you know, what should have been a 5-minute map was like a 14-minute map because I can't do any damage because I can barely hit anything because of that less area of effect. So really watch out for that one. All right, I already talked about Pantheon, so I'll just go ahead and skip over to my final question here, which are, what are some good corruptions for the build? And let's go ahead and take a look at those now. So I think really there's like 4 pieces that I would look at for good corruptions. And those would be body armor, shield, weapon, and helm. And I think helm is probably the least important of them. I mean, I'm not even running a corrupted helm. So just starting with the body armor, I think there's maybe 2 really good options and then a couple that are all right. So +1 to max all res is definitely like the most valuable. It's kind of a PoB warrior approach. You know, it's definitely the one that, like, if we look in the PoB here, let me just pull up my current chest, Ivory Tower. Okay, if I just do corrupt here, if we look at one to all reses, you know, it gives us like 4 to 5% more max hit on our fire, cold, and lightning. That's pretty good. Definitely the best defensive option of the set. You know, 50% reduced extra damage from crits is what I'm rocking with, and that's because crit, when it is a map mod, is super, super oppressive. Like, it just totally turns a map from being like, you know, regular, normal fun time playing Path of Exile into suddenly my bones have been turned to dust over and over and over again. So I really hate that massive variant, so I like to take that out with the reduced extra damage from crits. You can do +1 to max all res. Either of those are really good. Couple of other options that are maybe a little cheaper: increase max energy shield or increase max life. Max life can actually be better depending on whether you're close to like a 100 life break point where you'll get a little bit more energy shield, a little bit more damage. You you know, that can potentially be a little bit better. Kind of something you'll have to figure out with respect to your build, though. You could also do chaos damage taken or fire damage taken. Cold and light damage taken are also fine, but you have a little bit less fire res. You know, you have like 80% fire res because you're using a unique coruscating elixir, so you're not getting that extra 70% increased effect from what are they called? Instilling orbs? No, I need to know. Enkindling orbs. Yeah, you're not enkindling the coruscating elixir, so you have a little bit less max fire res than the other two elements. So those stand out just a little bit as being slightly superior. So that's body armors. For helmets, I think you really only have like two options. I think cannot be blinded is pretty nice because you don't want to be blinded and lose evasion and accuracy yourself. That's pretty good. Socketed skill gems get a 90% cost and reservation multiplier is really good. But the thing is, it's so expensive. It's just wildly expensive to get an Indigon that also has that cost and res multiplier on there. I just don't see why you would want that. In terms of cost benefit, I don't think it makes sense. I would rather sell it and then spend that money on some other part of the build. You can go with max ES or max life. Again, same as with the body armor. And, you know, maybe some of the like socketed AoE or socketed aura gems, if you have your auras in your helm, that can work. Increased effective shock, I actually think it's pretty good. So we are using, as I said, we're using this mastery that gives you 30% of shock effect, you know, max mana applying the shock effect at 30% of value. And we have 666% increased max mana. Nice. So, you know, that's like 200% more shock effect. So getting another 35% shock effect or so, 25 to 30% more shock effect, honestly, not bad, not terrible. But as I said, I don't even have a corruption on my Indigon, and that's because Indigon has so many like wild roll ranges on it: increased ES, increased max mana, increased cost of skills, and spell damage. There's all those different rolls. You kind of want them all to be high. So, you know, you're kind of trying to balance all of those out. Doing all of that and then also getting a good corruption on there is just a lot of effort. Maybe it's something I could think about upgrading for myself, but yeah, I don't know. A lot of effort to like get all of that and then also get a good corrupt like max ES or max life. All right, shield is up next. And so previously I had max ES, I believe. Max energy shield, max life. Again, they're pretty decent. I went with reduced extra damage from crits. Again, not required. It just does kind of remove some of those suddenly your health pool explodes moments, which it's nice to have those out of there. Those are pretty annoying to me. You can also just do like chance to block spell damage. Those are both pretty decent. Definitely will give you a lot more damage reduction in conjunction with all of your evasion. And then Fizz Taken as an element, and I really prefer to do cold or lightning for that. Fizz Taken is cold or lightning since you have more cold and more lightning res than you do fire. I certainly wouldn't want to do chaos if you're not chaos res capped, but Fizz Taken is cold or Fizz Taken is lightning, I think could both be pretty good. I wouldn't bother with any of the like plus the level of socketed gems. I don't really think it's worth it, even though you have some awakened gems in here, you know, potentially some value, like quite a lot of value actually out of that. I think the cost of those is probably not going to be worth it. Something you could consider though. All right, one thing I realized I skipped over as I was kind of looking at it is corruption on gloves. Now, obviously, the assumption would be, the ideal would be that you would go for cursed enemies with LA weakness on hit, but given that we're kind of late in the league, that can actually be a little expensive. You know, there's not a lot of them available. They're pretty high priced because of that low supply and relatively high demand. And, you know, this is optimal for damage. Like I have this PoB here pulled up, standard PoB. But, you know, if you drop that, if you just go with just like completely uncorrupted gloves, the damage is not that bad, right? Like you lose a couple million DPS by losing out on LA weakness. It would definitely be better, but you know, you could make it work. And you could very easily run a different type of corruption on the gloves, like curse enemies with enfeeble or tempt chains. And that'll definitely give you more defensive value. Not optimal, obviously, but definitely like something you can make work in terms of budget. And just to kind of show off some of those price differences, you know, tempt chains, it's pretty cheap as a corruption. And enfeeble, a little more expensive, understandably, since it is quite a bit better for defenses, but still, you know, it's not 100 divines necessarily. So that's an option. Or you could go a different direction entirely and just go with like attack speed on gloves. That's also an option. Attack speed on gloves, and you use like attack speed on weapon and use that to fix your to fix your attack speed instead of using a flask, but then you would need to figure out curses elsewhere, probably with a ring suffix. That's, I think, what I would go with, like a hunter ring suffix. So, you know, like you could do that. That would work. Ultimately, I think if I were to go that route, I would probably try to go with like a Crusader ring as one of my 2 rings and get a conductivity on hit curse from a Crusader ring. You know, you could do like an LE weakness hunter ring as well, but, you know, some sort of curse on hit ring basically as my method of applying a curse, because I don't want to actually cast curses ever. And, you know, that's basically what I would do. Is I would either, you know, if I can't afford an LE weakness on hit, I'd probably just go with like a Temp Chains or Enfeeble, or maybe just try and get it from a ring. And then finally, your weapon. And, you know, I really think there are like 2 main options here for your weapon. I guess 3, right? You could enchant it with attack speed and not have it be corrupted. That's an option, depending on how you're trying to balance out all the rest of your attack speed in your setup for your trigger rate. You could also get a corruption attack speed enchant. You can get area of effect. I think that's kind of the preferred one. I have a 20%, which is pretty nice. Or you can do melee hits have a chance to fortify, which is kind of funny, right? Like, you don't really think about this being like a build that would make a lot of value out, make a lot of use out of fortification. But the thing is, you don't actually have to hit with physical damage to get fortify. It's any sort of melee hits. And so your cyclones do enough damage to actually give you a decent amount of fortify. That is literally what I was playing around with before I started recording this. And I found the redundant evil bank map. I was playing around with a fortify gem in chest setup, just seeing, could I maintain fortify? Sort of. You know, fortify is damage reduction. It's damage reduction from hits up to 20%. So I don't necessarily think that would be something I would prioritize, but hypothetically speaking, it's something you could do. It's certainly an option that would be better than whatever the default is on Mjolnir. I can't even remember. I think it's stun, basically like reduce stun. What is it? Mjolnir. Mjolnir. All right. There we go. It's reduced enemy stun threshold. Yeah, that's so good. So I think Fortify would probably be better than that, but, you know, not super common. I would definitely just try to go with like AoE or attack speed, but, you know, something you can play around with. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Bye.